Hi, welcome to One on the Page. I'm Scott. We're doing 5-Year Battle PG Wodehouse, the years 1927 through 1931. Let's get started. The first book that PG Wodehouse published in this 5-year period is The Small Bachelor. It was published in 1927. It's about an artist named George Finch who lives in a small bachelor pad. He is in love with a woman named Molly. Molly's father is a big fan of like Western films and novels, and he takes a liking to George because George is from Idaho. But his wife doesn't like him as much because she wants Molly to marry somebody who's of her picking. Even though George Finch is rich, uh, the mother still doesn't want him and Molly together. And basically, it's George and Molly trying to get together, trying to get around the mother. There's also a cast of other characters, including a police officer who's trying to learn poetry with the help of one of George's friends, who is a self help author. It's funny. It's a funny book. It's a little bit entertaining. I do think it tends to lose steam a little bit over the course of the novel. But of course, because it is the first book that we are talking about, it is going to be ranked number one for the moment. Book number two, also published in 1927, is Meet Mr. Molyneux, which is the first of, I believe, three Mr. Molyneux collections, two of which we will be talking about today. Mr. Molyneux is a fisherman who can be often found in a bar telling tales somewhat up to the reader whether or not those tales are tall or not, but he does always seem to have a tale to bring up whenever anybody else is talking about something, and the tale always has to do with some member of his family. This first collection, I think, is probably the best of the three. The three that I remember. There may be more, but I just can't remember. I know the next 5-year period has another collection in it. But of the three that I remember at the moment, I believe it's the best. Uh, a lot of entertaining stories, particularly the ones about, and I have to remember what it's called. Oh, a tonic that's supposed to help a person, but it's called Buck You Uppo. There's a few stories in this book that contain that. A lot of man trying to win the love of a woman, including, I believe, the first story in the book, which is about a man who's trying to overcome his stammer to get with his love. And it's not the best story in the world. I think the stories that really stick out are the Buck You Uppo ones. But overall, pretty entertaining. I would say that this is probably better than The Small Bachelor. Book number three, published in 1928, is Money for Nothing. It's one of those caper type stories. It involves the small time crooks Dolly and Soapy Malloy, and also Chimp. I can't remember what his last name is. Not that Chimp is his first name, it's a nickname. But they have appeared in other novels, and they will appear in further ones, including better ones. It's basically a low level romance story. John is in love with Pat, but Pat, she doesn't feel like John has a backbone. So the whole crime caper stuff with Dolly and Soapy and Chimp are gonna give him that ability to develop his backbone and win the love of Pat. It's okay, not particularly great. I'll be honest, I have read it before, but I did have to look up what it was about because when I was going, okay, money for nothing, what's that about? Also, there are multiple books that have money in it, so including one more in this 5 year period. So I was like, wait a minute, is this one? No, no, wait a minute, something else. So probably of the money books, I would probably rank this one the lowest, at least of the ones I remember. I can remember off the top of my head three that have money in it. So I'm going to rank this below The Small Bachelor. Book number three, published in 1929, is Summer Lightning, which I have in this collection here. Summer Lightning is a Blandings Castle book. It is the third Blandings Castle book. It's the first novel that has Galahad Emsworth in it. Galahad is Lord Emsworth's brother. He's a little bit more on the ball than Lord Emsworth, maybe a bit conniving, but generally a decent person. And also, although I don't believe it's the first appearance overall, I do believe it is the first appearance of the Empress of Blandings in a Blandings Castle. No, it is the first appearance in a Blandings Castle novel, although I do believe she appears in a short story that was published before this. The Empress of Blandings is a prize pig, and probably something that Lord Emsworth loves more than certainly any other person, I would say. Uh, whether or not he loves it more than his garden, I don't know. That would be something to debate about, but he certainly loves the Empress of Blanding. And it is a love story. One of the Hugo Carmody, who appeared in Money for Nothing, he was more of a minor character in there, is now Lord Emsworth's secretary because business venture that he tried failed. So he has to make money. He falls in love with one of Lord Emsworth's niece. And there are other romances that are going on. And so, especially with the appearance of Galahad, or Galley as he's called, there's a lot of caper. I don't remember exactly how Wodehouse phrased it, but this is one of the novels I would look at as he basically says it's just keep building up the tension like it's dynamite until it's going to explode. And this is one of the best examples I've seen of it. Uh, Generally seen as one of the better Blandings Castle novels. This one in Heavy Weather, the next Blandings Castle that is published after this, which is also somewhat of a sequel, generally seen as some of the better Blandings Castle books. So yeah, this one's going to be number one for right now. Published in 1929 also is Mr. Mulliner Speaking, which is the second Mr. Mulliner collection. I, much as with Money for Nothing, I had to look this up. I remember many of the stories from Meet Mr. Mulliner. Didn't remember as many from this one, so I had to look it up, and it's like, oh, okay. I remember them now, but they aren't particularly great. And I just don't like Mr. Mulliner that much. I much like the oldest member in the golf stories, he he's more just a narrator for the stories, but I don't think he works as seamlessly as the oldest member. I don't really have a lot to say about it. I didn't really like it. The next collection, I believe, if there are only three collections, but one of the following collections is more memorable, but may be less enjoyable. This just because a lot of it is concentrated in Hollywood, and I not that this has anything to do with this. I have to say Woodhouse had a dim view of Hollywood, having worked there for a bit. So they're a little bit more cynical than some of Woodhouse's other works, so they don't work as well. But this one, I think, may still be worse as far as story quality. So I am gonna, for now, put it down at the bottom. The next book is Very Good Jeeves, which was published in 1930. It is the last Jeeves and Wooster story collection. Every other book after this will be a novel. He does publish Jeeves and Wooster stories after this, but they don't make their own collection anymore. They will just be like individual stories in a general collection. I generally like all of Jeeves and Wooster books. Generally. The problem is that there are often characters in there that I do not like. One of them, Bingo Little, appears in here. He's not the worst character. He's frustrating because as somebody who is quite fond of Bertie Wooster, I don't like people who are needlessly dicks to him. And Bingo Little is that type of character. And I believe Rocky Todd, who appeared in the first and the second collection, was also probably one of the worst. But, and this is something that I will be debating probably next month since we're going to be reading this book for the podcast that we do. Bobby Wickham is probably my least favorite Woodhouse character. I I'll be interested to see what Robin thinks because I know as of the moment, I think that Smith is her least favorite character, although one of the characters in a standalone book may be her least favorite. But for me, I don't think there's any other character I dislike more than Bobby Wickham. So having Bobby Wickham in several of these stories does bring it down a bit. I also think I don't think it's the worst of the short story collections because one of the short story collections is has like half its stories that were already in another collection. But if I were to have read each of these, I believe, four short story collections of Jeeves and Wooster, and, and basically read them in their entirety and not base it on any other ones, so that I don't know that the short stories in this one were also included in this one, I think this would probably be my least favorite as far as story quality. So it's not a Mr. Moliner book, and I'm dinging this collection a little bit, but at least of right now, I still think it's probably going to be second place. I have some unmemorable novels in Mr. Moliner collections below it, so yeah, it's going to be under Summer Lightning. Big Money, second Money book, published in 1931. It's another caper kind of thing. There are four young people who fall in love. The young men, Barry and Biscuit, and the young women, Anne and Catherine. Anne gets engaged to Biscuit, but finds herself attracted to Barry, who falls in love with her. Biscuit ends up spending time with Catherine. There are also some criminals in here. There's a little bit of an adventure in a house. I remember it being entertaining when I read it. I believe it was one of probably the first 20 or 30 Woodhouse books I read. So I hadn't gotten the entire experience of Woodhouse at that point. Do enjoy it, but probably not as much as I did at that point. But I am going to put it under Very Good Jeeves. Honestly, I would say You could switch this and Very Good Jeeves back and forth. They're almost co second place right now, but I think probably just because of name recognition, I'm gonna give Very Good Jeeves just a little bit of a top on it. The last book is If I Were You, published in 1931. If I Were You, unlike many of the books published early in his career, isn't quite as well known as most of these other books or as widely available. I, I I was able to get it for a decent price, but it's kind of available a little bit the same way some of his school novels are, except his school novels are available on Kindle for free because they're outside the copyright time frame. This one is not, so finding it was a little bit difficult. It is the story of a baker and an earl who were switched at birth, and they both find out later in life that the earl is actually what would have been the baker, and the baker should have been the earl. The governess feels guilty about it later and tells everybody, and then there's a lot of going back and forth with the earl trying to be the baker and the baker trying to be an earl. It's fine, it's okay, it's just it's not particularly funny. It doesn't have the trademark Woodhouse wit, and I was talking earlier about how things build up in Woodhouse books until there's just this big explosion, and it's just like it was more of a firecracker or one of those little snaps. I do think it is better than Mr. Molnar speaking, but that's it. So it is going to be, yeah, just above. So there were 8 books this 5 year period. So coming in at number 8 is Mr. Molnar speaking. Coming in at number 7 is If I Were You. Coming in at number 6 is Money for Nothing. Coming in at number 5 is The Small Bachelor. Coming in at number 4 is Meet Mr. Molnar. Coming in at number 3 is Big Money. Coming in at number 2 is Very Good Jeeves. And honestly, books 2 through 8, then there's a huge jump to number 1 is Summer Lightning. So that is it for this 5 year period. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and we'll talk to you next time when we do the years 1932 through 1936.